Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call our meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being streamed and recorded. Do we have any additions? An adoption of the agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Growing, seconded by Councillor Penny. All in favor? Passed. We have Jack McQuaig with McQuaig and Associates and Natalie here with us. We'll turn it over to you guys. I introduced them.
There we go, unmuted. Thank you. So for those that aren't familiar, my name is Jack McQuaig. I'm with McQuaig and Associates Engineering. We have Natalia Cecily, who's also with our company. And we are working with the NRM on revitalizing the town hall, among other things. And I'm here today to ask some basic questions. As we're marching forward, there's a few things that we want to throw at council to make sure we're totally on track and everyone's in lockstep at this point. So I have a very brief set of slides I would love to share. And here we go. Okay, bear with me now. I believe you should be able to see my screen now. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So basic introductions, as I said, we are looking mostly at the municipal office and the related buildings today, and wanted to present a few options to the council as we go. The first one being accessibility. Now, we have talked about this several times, and I just want to basically cast it in stone. The plan is to give better accessibility to the town hall. There is a level of how far we go. We are talking about installing an elevator. We have made that recommendation. We are at this, we haven't started any design work, but we're assuming elevator access to the second floor is a requirement. But however, you can, if you pull on that string, it can go as far as you want. You could literally have every single workstation barrier-free, all the washrooms and everything else. My recommendation at a basic level is that you should have barrier-free access to washrooms. You should have barrier-free access to the second floor. And the general question I'm throwing at the council today, and it's really a discussion more than an immediate answer, is do you want, yes, no, do you want barrier-free access with elevators and everything to the second floor? And what level of barrier-free access do you want to the entire building? So this is not a presentation where you just listen. I'm kind of asking questions, and I'd love some discussion coming back.
Well, I know for myself, like thinking that it's a community place, kind of a spot for the community. We want to be able to have as many people access the building as possible. I would like to see what it would look like as a fully barrier-free facility for employment and any patrons that might come in. That way we don't have any, I guess, barriers, so to speak, to be in place when we're looking at hiring or having people visit the facility. That's just my personal opinion. Anyone else?
Councillor Penny here. My opinion would be to just have the elevator access and general accessibility around the building with the bathrooms and such. I don't really feel, I don't know how much I'd feel about making every room, every workspace accessible. I'm sure changes could be made for individuals if need be in office spaces, but that's just my thoughts without having any costing or any idea what the difference would be. Costing pretty hard thing to just decide on.
Councillor Roper?
For me, I would like to see the building brought up to be fully accessible. And I think that would be a better use of our investments as well for down the road. If we ever decide to sell the building, it'll have that much more value. So that's my take.
Thanks. So Councillor Gerwing here, nice to see you again. I think without having a plan in place, being able to say, so this is what a fully accessible town center would look like, and this is what it would cost, and this is what an accessible town center looks like, whereas all the public spaces are fully accessible, and this is what it looks like, and this is what it costs. I feel like I'm being asked for my opinion on something that I'm really having a hard time envisioning and in determining what the difference in the cost factor would be.
So if I'm not sure what the protocol is for having the floor. Can I request the floor back or?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mr. McQuaig.
Okay, thanks. So yes, and I'm sorry if, yes, you are absolutely right. It's very vague right now because before we do any design work, we just want to make sure we're not going down a road that you don't want us to travel because we will be exploring exactly those questions. So one of the big step is elevator access to the second floor. And if we have a general agreement that, yeah, that's probably a good idea if we can afford it, that's all we really need at this point, because in my opinion, you can't do anything until you have at least that. And once you have that, how far we go really depends on exactly how all the spaces are being used and all that sort of stuff. So there will be more decisions later about, well, what about this area if we're using it for this? How barrier free does this have to be and everything else? But from at least a few answers, there is some degree of interest in considering having all spaces barrier free. Once we get further down the road with the design, we will have say, okay, this part is great, that's easy. Of course, we have washrooms. By the way, this area here in the back 40, to make this barrier free means these will be the ramifications. What do you want to do? Yes, no, should we make these changes? But it means that barrier free is in the discussion all the way through the design process, which is great. That's fine. We can deal with that. And if that's what's on the table for one of the design parameters everywhere that people care about at a high enough level that, yes, barrier free always costs a little bit more, although sometimes it doesn't at all, then we can work with that. That's fine. And there will be questions later. Is that?
Thank you
more
for
clear?
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit. We got another question from Councillor Gerwin.
So more of a comment, but so thinking in terms of what our second floor looks like right now, and there's the 2 steps up after you've gone up the main staircase, and then to get to that back room, you have to go through the Raven room, but then what's the room behind the Raven room called? The war room. If I'm thinking anybody that was in a scooter or anything like that, that's not really accessible, but yet in my mind, that would be a basic accessibility plan, right? And then the other point that I wanted to make too is any opportunities that we would have to apply for accessibility grants could be incorporated. And I know this is already on your radar, but that could help too in us envisioning greater accessibility throughout the entire building. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. McQuaig.
Yeah, so I would, based on what I've heard, unless anyone else anything else to say, my notes are we will be exploring all accessibility in all public spaces and also all office spaces. And if any specific areas come up that are especially difficult, we'll bring that back and saying, this is why we have a problem here. But and just to be clear, I'm not surprised by the answer. That's pretty much exactly what I expected. But just making sure we're doing the right thing here, and that's great. So having said that, I would love to keep moving forward here. Is it fair to say we're done with the accessibility question?
Yeah, I think that we got that one covered.
Okay. The bear pit. Would council want to consider layout changes or redesign, or just maintain status quo? I'm looking at the bear pit right now. Interestingly, I was looking at some drawings from a few decades ago that were the original application drawings for the change, and the bear pit looked very different. It originally was designed to be sort of a council in front with stadium style seating going back for the public and everything like that. Right now, the interesting thing is the bear pit has adequate HVAC. It's probably the only area of the building that does. And but in terms of the layout and how it's used and how the public accesses it and everything else, it's a little bit odd. If you're happy with it, that's great. We can leave it the way it is. If you want to make changes, we can explore making changes to the bear pit. And
We also feel it's a little odd in here. Well, I do anyways. I'd like to see some sort of concept of a new design, definitely. And I think that's a general consensus around the board, but Councillor Roper?
Yeah, I feel the same way, Councillor Andrews. I think it's time for a change, and we should have a bear pit where all members of council can be seen from the gallery. So I would like to see some changes for sure.
okay.
And Councillor Grewing?
Yeah, that was my point too. I don't want my back to anybody. It's most uncomfortable, you know, when you're surrounded by people. So whatever design you're thinking about doing, I would like you to keep that into consideration, as well as enough space, obviously, for physical distancing that continues to be required. And I mean, it was important before, but even more important now.
Councillor Penny?
I would just echo the same comments. Be interested to see some new renderings.
And say welcome to our mayor who's made it in. We're just discussing at the moment if we're willing to look at and consider a new layout for our bear pit is where we're at.
Oh, okay.
General consensus is council would like to see some sort of designs, and we're just taking opinions.
I would note that when the grade 1 class came here last week and sat around the table, one of the comments from the grade 1s was how much they liked this. It reminded them of a large kitchen table. And it was, yes. And Councillor Gerwing's grandchildren were here and they just loved this table. I think for myself. Yeah. For myself, I you know, I have some sentimental attachment to this table, the years that this has been here and all the things that have been discussed around this table. But the functionality of it is probably not the best. And so I guess those are the two things, and that's good. I guess I would like to see some layouts and see what other designs there'd be.
Okay, so taking the floor back. So my notes are, yes, it's on the list. We should, and just to be clear, our original assessment was finding code issues and problems and things that were worn out. The bear pit's not worn out. There's no required upgrade based on it being end of service life. It's just when you're doing all of the other renovations, it makes sense to address it now, and that's what we're looking at. My only comment about the grade 1 class is it's funny. I think that table is awesome if you want to play roller hockey on the table, but otherwise it seems a bit overkill for what you have. But okay, then we can keep moving through here. So
I think the Eiffel Tower is not very functional either, but I hear they're going to be keeping it. So same with the Statue of Liberty.
okay. So we will be presenting some options for the bear pit as well. And we will be seeking some more thorough feedback once we're at our next group meeting. We're going to be having our architect involved. But as a general rule, a typical one would involve the council facing the public. And typically the staff would face the council and not the public. If the staff are, so someone like me, I would be presenting to the council and not to the public unless you had a specific lectern that's used for that. But those are we're in a level of details that I'm not comfortable going down that road now because we haven't done that yet, but it's now on the list and we will be exploring some options. So The other thing, and this is great, we're marching ahead. I love having answers. The other thing I'd like to talk about is some of the other options within the town square once we get past the bear pit and everything else. Right now, there is a childcare space. Technically, it's not a daycare, it's deemed a play school. It would not meet the standards for licensed daycare. And there are different standards based on the age of the children inside. And there are funding programs available. And the question is the council interested in making this a proper daycare center that meets the standards? And I realize that you're going to say, well, how much money do we get and how much will it cost and everything else? But the answer is, before we explore that, is there any interest at all? Or is this something where you don't want to open that can of worms? Because again, all of these questions are along the lines of, we can explore it. We don't have the answers yet, but I don't want to start a whole public conversation about what we're doing unless council is willing to go down that road potentially. And this is why I'm asking the question.
So any comments from councilors? Councilor Andrews.
Barring costs and everything like you've mentioned, I'm not exactly sure what the difference in the codes would be. So if it's going to be purpose built and then no longer be able, like, it's not going to fit for really anything else, I might have a harder time looking at it. But it's just all considering too on how long that we plan, the daycare plans to stay there. Like if it's going to be a full time for the future, we won't see it ever leave, then to purpose build something for them would be a better idea. But if there's no real difference in meeting the code and not meeting the code in, future use, I would say let's look at having it meet standards for them.
Councilor Penny.
I'd like to see it explored anyway, so we have some options in front of us.
I think we've identified that childcare is an issue in the community. It's probably going to be a bigger issue in the future than it is right now. And, this is one solution to that problem. I think we should at least look at it anyway. Councillor Grewing, any comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm heartened to hear the comments around the table. I think it's imperative for the community moving forward. I know that there is currently some work being done in the community around addressing the daycare issue. And as we heard from Northern Health, it's definitely a recruitment issue to have expanded daycare spaces. So currently right now, the tenant that's in there is a play school. They don't offer service during July and August, and what service they offer is very limited. It's not necessarily daycare, it's definitely a play school. So yeah, just to make that distinction, but I would very much like to see us presented with some options to bringing that space up to code.
Mr. McQuaig? Sorry.
Sorry.
I'll just hear from Councillor Roper first and then let you address the councillors.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment, just to echo everyone else's comments. Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to look at the possibility of expanding that into a space that could be a fully functional childcare facility. I think it's going to be so important moving forward as the community grows. Daycare is just one of those things that growing families need when they're looking at relocating to communities and raising their families. So I think it's probably one of the most important things we can do. And it'll give us that extra tool in our tool belt for the future. So that's my opinion.
Mr. McQuaig.
I was just going to add that we are discussing purpose built because any certification by the provincial government would probably be the most likely, but there is a standard that you must meet to qualify. And I believe they haven't finalized it yet, but there are new regulations coming out about subsidized daycare and everything else coming from the federal government, and they're making deals with the province. But like it or not, it would have to be a built in to meet all of there have to be a certain number of toilets and washroom facilities that are tiny little small things and everything else, and small sinks. And it would be purpose-built. There's requirements for everything from areas of play, a number of cubbies and lockers and all this sort of stuff, and they all have to be built in. So yes, it would be purpose-built, to answer the first question. However, we're not talking about, well, I guess we are, but we're not talking about casting something in stone that can't be removed. It's just something that if we are doing it, it would be for at least several years. It's not just about buying some better lockers or something, or better tables. It is purposely building the facility.
Mrs. McIver.
Yeah, I just wanted to lend the thought that the reason that we're bringing this as a concept to council is thinking back to the rec center, and when some of those spaces were built out, they were built out with a need for the community in mind. So the community hall kitchen, the scale it is and with the equipment it is, and the concession kitchen with the equipment that's in there and its function was not necessarily to meet the service we provided in the past, or that was provided in the past. It was forward looking, what we anticipated the community to need over time. And as the owner of the property, those were the decisions made at that time. And it wasn't to necessarily match make between an operator and a space. It was basically thinking about the space and thinking about what the community needs from that space. And then as time wears on, it could be a variety of forms or operators that go in, and providing a space actually is a bit of a launching off point for operators to consider how they might deliver a service, because trying to set something like that up from the ground up is a bit overwhelming, I think. So, would the play school ever be able to develop that space to this standard within their means is probably unlikely, and possibly in another situation. So it's not unheard of for communities or not-for-profits to take a role in kind of that capital work, because it removes that burden from the operator themselves. So just some thoughts. It's not to say that the municipality will run a daycare. It's just to basically create a space in the community that opens it up for opportunities for someone to come in and provide the service.
Yeah, I think, we recognize that going forward in the future here, we're going to need more daycare spaces in our community. And this is probably a good opportunity for the municipality to do those upgrades, as Councillor Andrews and Ms. McIver pointed out. So I think we should explore that, Mr. McQuaig.
Okay, if I can move on. Seniors housing. So Grace Manor is attached to the building. During our initial reviews and everything else, Grace Manor, we drew a line and said not part of the assessment, not part of the plan, not part of the upgrades and everything else, because it was a separate building. Over the last several months, I've learned a few things about who owns it and everything else, and there's been a few surprises. Recently, I was there and did a complete survey of Grace Manor, and we will definitely, for any of the repairs we're planning on doing to the town hall that are, well, it's not that they're non-negotiable, but they're definitely on the list to be done. We have to upgrade the electrical service, and right now the electrical service and the fire alarm service for the two buildings is intertwined in a way that should be fixed. And once we fix it, we can have a separate, completely separate service to Grace Manor. Now, here's the thing. If this wasn't a public building and it was something like that, and you were just developers, you would say, I'm fixing my problem. You guys have your problem. Deal with it. I don't care. Grace Manor isn't really third party. You're kind of somehow involved with its operations and everything else. So we're considering what has to be done. Having done a visual inspection, but a reasonably thorough review, it's actually in very good shape. It's in much better condition than the town hall, to be blunt. I think part of that is because it was purpose-built for one thing, and it's pretty much the same thing it was built for. Whereas the town hall has been tumbled over each time as each change has been made on an ad hoc basis, which is a lot of the problems that the town hall has run into. But Grace Manor right now is not in bad shape. We should separate the electrical supply. We should upgrade the way the fire alarm works, but otherwise it's okay. And to what level does the council want to get more or less involved in Grace Manor? I don't know. And this is something that is worthy of discussion. And so I'm throwing it at you guys, and I would love to get feedback.
Councillor Roper.
Yeah, I know that we have had previous discussions about perhaps providing some sort of auxiliary emergency power to the seniors. So I think now would be a good time to tie that in, especially since we're separating the power grids. Let's see if we can find a way to make that happen. I think that was Councillor Andrews' motion.
Any other comments? Well, oh, sorry, Councillor Andrews?
I would definitely like to lend a hand and help out where we can. I don't want to go completely into remodeling Grace Manor or anything, but I think some discussions with their board there and maybe council or staff and seeing what kind of they had in mind, like let them know what's going on. I'm sure, I don't know if that's been done yet or not, and see what they had an appetite for as well. Like I want to be able to help out and have the electrical and fire and all the safety protocols, at least help them out with that for sure.
So from my point of view, Mr. McQuaig, I guess I'm a little concerned about Grace Manor because it seems to be one of those things where it's half in, half out. I think the municipality's natural gas pays for the natural gas at Grace Manor, et cetera. And I would like to see that building as much as possible be a standalone and have its own electrical service, its own fire alarm service, its own natural gas. And then council can deal with, you know, how we want to deal with the management of Grace Manor, whether we want to subsidize, you know, the electrical backup generating system, what we intend to do as far as compensation, if it's our facility. And I think some of these are good goals, but I don't know what the cost would be of doing all those things. But we sort of seem to have something where we're not exactly subsidizing this. It's almost like a mishmash of some things are part of the municipal complex and some things aren't. And I would like to see it either all in or all out. Councillor Gerwin.
So I have a slightly different take on that. Is how I see it is it's part of this complex, like physically part of the complex. So kind of what I was thinking about is that we should be responsible for the electrical, the upgraded fire system, and I'm very much on board for the emergency power capacity, and then the skeleton of the building. So whether that's siding, windows, like that type of thing, I see that as it's our building. Anything internal, so whatever services that they want, a group kitchen or individual suites, I see that as part of the board or the current owner or leasee of that portion of the building. That was my perspective on it.
So given that those units in there are being leased, and I take it the municipality does not receive any funds from the lease of that building. So those funds totally go for the operations, I guess, of Grace Manor, as far as I can tell. Yet the utilities are being paid by all the taxpayers. And this is what I was trying to get to, is if we're strictly a landlord and we're charging rent like we do to some of the other facilities, or whether this is a standalone building and it's up to the management of Grace Manor, whether they lease the space from us or what sort of arrangement council wants to have with them, rather than they pay the electrical, but we pay the gas, the sort of half in, half out sort of thing. So, Councillor Penny.
Is it okay if I go?
Yep.
Okay, so just addressing that is, I guess that would be really hard to make any of those types of decisions from my perspective until, you know, I had some sort of a look at the financials. Like I have no idea if the current or future rent capacity even meets their needs, or are they fundraising to pay their electrical bill? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have any of that information, and so it would, from my perspective, be very hard to make an all-in or an all-out decision. I have no problem in supporting that whole concept there. I think what past councils have done in having a play school or a daycare, a library, a theater, and seniors housing all in one cluster would be the new word. But, you know, this is like something that people wish that they had done years ago, right? The only, to make it perfect would be if the rec center was attached, right? So, I mean, this concept that the community has done throughout the years is, you know, seen as a gold star in other communities. So I would be supportive of anything that we can do to make that reality continue. And then again, just going back to your all in or your all out, I would be hard pressed to make a decision without more information on what that whole financial reality is for that complex.
Councillor Penny.
Okay, not to belabor the whole point. My point would be the electrical and the fire, for sure, undoubtedly, in my mind, would be responsible for. There's no question there. How much farther we go. As soon as I heard of an elevator going in the main part of the building, I started to think about the issues that Grace Manor has had with even upkeeping with their service agreement on their elevator. So maybe even we can get intertwined in that somehow, considering we'll have to be on some sort of service agreement for our elevator. So without a doubt, I'd like to see us help out as much as we can. I think as we tick back up here with industry, hopefully the whole point of being able to help out with daycare and play school is just as important for our seniors, because if we're going to keep families here, we're going to keep people working here, we need all of that involved. So anyway, I think all he was looking for was if we wanted to investigate it. I think I would say yes, I'd like to investigate what points we go to.
Okay, Mr. McQuaig, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think you get a general idea.
Well, with respect, not really. I'm still not sure where we would go with it. So just to reiterate where we are with Grace Manor, there is a society that operates it, and the comment about the financials is an interesting one. And I only got all the words second and third hand, but I understand there's an issue with the financials about not being able to get the records out of Fort St. John, I believe it is. Anyway, so that's not my problem, but somewhere up there's something to be done there. But the way the building has been kept up for the last few decades is they've asked for favors from plumbers and people and everything else. And when you're running basically a place that you're thinking your own father might be in at some point, or maybe is now, it's a little bit easier to come in and do a bunch of work on an as-needed basis. And they've managed to keep it up fairly well. And there's nothing inside right now that's critical, short of, I mean, they've got battery powered emergency lighting, which works. It's all fine. Very minor issues. Yes, the electrical service, if we're doing the work on the town hall, we will separate it and make sure it's working. And it kind of makes sense to share a backup generator. If you've got one, you may as well make it big enough to do both. Sure, that's all easy. But the rest of it immediately, if you are going to own the building, and right now you don't, and BC Housing owns it, and there's another question about what does BC Housing pay for? So when you're doing your negotiations, guess what? There's another party on the table. If you're going to own the building and fix the building and do ongoing maintenance and upkeep and everything else, that's a question, because there are some equipment that you should be looking at certainly in the next 10 years that will have to be replaced, and maybe it would make sense to do it as part of the overall upgrades now or not. And I guess the council has to decide, well, and I've heard from different council members, is Grace Manor operations and upkeep and renovations required? Because every time a suite turns over, there's a cost. You have to basically replace carpets and repaint and do all this sort of stuff. Is the council going to take that on? Are they going to try to push it on BC Housing, or are they going to leave the society, which I understand is underfunded, to try to keep doing what they can, asking for favors and getting things done. The fact that it has been working for some time is good. Long term, I think if you looked at the records and you would say, I don't know how you managed to do this so far, but it's been working, so let's not mess with it. Maybe, I don't know. So I don't have clear instructions right now whether we should consider any upgrades or changes beyond just keeping it separate. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, Mr. McQuaig. It just bringing all this stuff forward. I didn't know BC Housing's involvement with this. I don't know how deep BC Housing is involved in this, et cetera. There's maybe we could ask for a short report from administration regarding this. Mrs. McIver?
We can certainly bring back a report. We did some research on the property and it was a tangled web, but essentially, yeah, BC Housing is registered as the registered owner of the property. And I'm not sure if anyone recalls, but originally it was a single story annex. Then I think it was in the early 2000s, 98. The Grace Manor Society, or it's not the Grace Manor Society, sorry, the Fort Nelson Seniors Housing Society, basically Grace Manor mortgaged a second story edition. So BC Housing does own the property, the full property, but Grace Manor has an outstanding mortgage that for the second story. So on that whole property, they have a lease back to BC Housing. So they have costs related to the mortgage, costs related to the lease that is due to BC Housing, as well as all the operating costs.
Okay, yeah, if we can get some clarification on that. Now that you tell me that it's owned by BC Housing, I'm wondering why is the municipality paying BC Housing's heating costs and so on? And I don't know if there's other issues there. And maybe we need to do this to assist the seniors in delivering the service that we expect. But it's something I guess we need to pull it apart and get a good understanding of exactly what's going on there before we start doing anything else. Ms. Berry.
So council's like a report to come back.
Yes, please.
So if council goes past.
Sure. Could I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Penny, second by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried.
And secondly is just, the intent today obviously is not, because a lot of information coming to council, there's missing pieces in terms of some of the information that's required. So it's, if anything, it's to get the discussion, to get a flavor for what council would be or might not be in favor for. So it can, so for Jack and the group with the staff, kind of start taking those next steps. Well, what I'm hearing, or what we're hearing, obviously there is a desire to look at something. It's not, so it's, what I'm not hearing is do nothing for Grace Manor, essentially. So we're, but I guess it's in terms of, as we walk through this process, it's, more information to be required to come back specific in terms of what that looks like, costs, to what level, to what degree. When you talk backup power, for example, when we talk backup power, significant upgrade if we get backup power to every single room for the whole facility. That's a large unit, right? One of some other options, for example, to deal with some of the issues that were brought forward before, things of that nature. So those are still items that need to be investigated and discussed too by the team, right, and by the group.
Councillor Gerwin.
So, I would go back to what I said earlier, is it still makes sense to me that we would be responsible for the skeleton of the building, because no matter who owns that portion, that building is attached to us. So, we don't want to put ourselves in a position where it is not meeting whatever code of the day. Not to say that it is, as was been reported, it's in very good shape, but a lot of that has been done on volunteer basis, and maybe that will continue, but maybe it won't. And the outside of the building, we want it to match this building as we're moving forward. It wouldn't make sense to me to have part of a building that's attached that isn't of the same look and skeleton as this one.
I guess my problem with that, Councillor Gerwin, is if BC Housing owns the building, what we're doing is we're doing the electrical, we're looking after the skeleton of the building, as you said, for BC Housing. And Well, yes, and see, there's the differences. If this is BC Housing building, they have a responsibility to make sure that it's up to code and everything else if they own the building. But we do have that responsibility to our seniors as well. We want to make sure that this is going in the right direction. That's sort of why I'm looking for some direction from staff to explain to us exactly maybe some of the history of this, how it got to where it is, what BC Housing's responsibility is as far as the building goes, and so on. Councillor Penny.
You said everything I was about to say. I can't wait to get a report back on this and find out exactly where BC Housing sits. Because I agree with Councillor Gerwing as well. I mean, without a doubt, but I don't want to see the municipality pay for something that BC Housing should be stepping up to. So,
Mr. McQuaig, is that sufficiently fuzzy for you so that you can't possibly understand anything that we
guess.
just seem to be in a bit of a quandary here of our relationship with that?
That
facility.
That's exactly why I brought it up, because it's not clear, and I understand why everyone would want to help out the Grace Manor Society or the Fort Nelson Senior Society. It's not clear again exactly what it's called, but I can totally understand why the council would want to support them, and I also understand why would Fort Nelson be funding BC Housing. That seems odd, and so there's something to work out there. From our end, we basically have always assumed the electrical and the fire alarm will be sorted out in some fashion and at least separated, because they should be. That's just good practice. Everything else after that comes down to, well, you're going to have to negotiate with the society and with housing to figure out what you really want to do with the building long term, and who's going to own it, and who's going to maintain it, and who's going to pay for it. And then you can get into questions like, well, you can upgrade your heating and lower your bills a little bit, and it can pay out over time and all this sort of stuff. But if one person is paying for the energy and the other person is paying for the capital, then that discussion doesn't make any sense, because I don't care what your monthly heating bills are, because I don't have to pay for a new boiler as long as someone else is paying the heating bills. So
I think that's exactly the problem we're facing here, is we need to get some clarification just for those exact reasons.
So we will proceed at this basis, assuming the electrical and fire alarm can be separated as they should be. And for the others, we will wait until someone figures out what's happening with all the different players involved.
Well, we'll try to be very swift for you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's cool. I'm very good with that. So, okay. Is that it for Grace Manor?
I believe so.
Okay. There are other tenant spaces, and not to say Grace Manor isn't a tenant space, but there's some tenant spaces within the building. There's the BC Services building, the library, and the theater. The assumption has always been, and this is an easy question, the theater and library are staying. The BC Services space is in decent condition, but one thing that we would like to do is question them and actually survey them, for lack of a better term, and find out what their long-term plans are, what needs they might have moving forward, and should they be included. However, the staff actually told us, well, hey, before you do that, don't open that until the council is okay with asking and talking to these people, because we're not sure what level of involvement we want moving forward with potential tenants and everything else. And just to throw one more little grenade into the mix, there's the area we affectionately call the back 40, which is presently just used for storage, which is a whole area that may or may not become tenant space. We could build it out so it can be tenanted, it could be rented out to a new tenant, or at least to a new tenant, or it can be used by existing staff or whatever. So right now I'm looking for some feedback from council about how they feel about all these spaces. So the simple questions are, should we talk to the theater directly and find out what their long-term plans are and what their wish list is, similar to BC Services, or would council rather do that themselves or have staff do it to basically make sure they don't go down some tangent that's going to just delay the whole process? I don't know. And this is a question for council to answer. And for the rest of it, what do they see in terms of tenants in the future?
Thank you. Councillor Gerwin.
Yeah, so from my perspective, how I see it is that I think the initial statement should come from mayor and council via staff into our long-term tenants, the theater, the library, they're staying. BC Services, I think, can be included in that as well, right? And so like currently, the 3 anchor tenant, well, 4 because the play school too, all that they know about these plans is if they've watched the council meetings or if somebody has told them. I don't know that they have been formally invited to the table to be informed firsthand as to what the plans are. So I think that that would be step 1. And then I have no problem in Jack and company then going step 2 as interviewing them and asking them, you know, what they see their future plans, because, you know, we're all thinking growth, but we do need to consider shrinkage as well. So I think that that's appropriate. So that's how I would like to see us handle that.
Any other, Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, maybe it's just short-sightedness, but I just assumed that they'd all be staying forever. Like we'd all be in this building together. So like that, I didn't have any ideas as to what are we going to do with the library if they choose to leave. My idea was we're keeping the library. What do they need to bring them up to code? So let's retrofit, hopefully not a retrofit, but like, let's bring everything up to snuff. Same with the theater, same with Service BC, same with Play School. The future areas for future tenants, I don't know. I don't know how much extra space is there. Is that something that there's potential growth, but then Councillor Goring brings up shrinkage. Now I got to throw another thought in my head, right? So I wouldn't want to see making areas for new tenants unless there's an absolute need brought to us. I would want to reserve that for potential office growth, storage, things like that. Because I'm sure there's paperwork and stuff in the rec center we need areas for too. I'm sure we can utilize spaces for storage.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, Councillor Gerwin.
I think that, I'm not sure if it was this council, but I know that previous council wasn't really interested in developing any spaces for commercial renting because there was a lot already on the market and we didn't want to seem that we were competing with that market. I'm just unsure whether this current council has made the same commitment, and I don't even know if it matters, but I mean, that was something that we need to think about as well.
Okay, Councillor Roper.
Yeah, I would like to see the tenants involved as well. I mean, we own the whole building, so I'm sure there's things we can include for them as well. And as far as the extra space, I feel the same way that Councillor Andrews does. I'd like to see how we can utilize that space either for ourselves or for our tenants before we looked at creating more rental space. There is quite a bit in the community already, so I'd like to see how we can use that space for ourselves.
Thank you. Mrs. McIver?
So part of this question was triggered by the fact that earlier this year, the Phoenix had asked council for a letter of support to pursue a business plan for expanding the theater out the east side of the building. And there remains an invitation outstanding for the society to come meet with council to discuss that project. So we were trying to anticipate, based on the questions that might be asked in that consultation with the tenants, what we might get back. And we didn't necessarily want to design a survey that would preempt that conversation between council and the society directly, particularly because the Phoenix is one of the tenants who is also municipally funded. So there could be a bit of a double-edged sword there, in that we ask broad questions without having council directly involved in that conversation that might have long-term implications from a budgetary perspective. So that was part of the reason we want to have this conversation in terms of what scope of improvements is council looking to consider in terms of how we approach the tenants for their long-term plans, because for some it might mean a pretty substantial expansion. whereas others might have some ideas just within the footprint they already have. So I guess that's kind of where we're looking for some input too.
Yeah, I would like to see our staff, talk to the tenants here first and get some idea of what they're thinking about, and, then get McQuaig involved in this as well. Certainly, we need to make sure that things are up to code, things are safe for people. I guess with the back 40, as you put it, Mr. McQuaig, one of my issues, I've taken a tour back there. One of my issues is with the weight of some of the things in those rooms there. And I don't know whether or not that seems to be an awful lot of paper on a floor that was never designed for that. Things like that give me a little pause. I'd like to see some investigation at least done in that range, but what sort of storage we can do in that area, and to make sure that it's safe as well.
So I can speak to that. As once a new plan is done, if the use of the space is going to be for document storage, so that would count the equivalent of a library. The loading was not designed for that. There's no structural distress. It's not going to fall down tomorrow, but we'd probably fix a few things and upgrade some of the walls below to make sure it could do that, if that's your plan. But just to circle back a little bit, one of the questions about the theater, let me say this in the right way, it doesn't sound bad. Some of the best space available from the street is the space next to the BC services that the theater seems to be using kind of for storing stuff. It's technically their offices, but I don't even know that it's used for their offices. I don't know what it's used for. And that space, frankly, is premium space. It's right next to the street. It could be very good. I don't know that that's used for its best use right now. And it could be that the theater should use it for something else. I don't know. But to me, that flag, I was there going, this seems odd. So.
Councillor Roper?
Just to provide a little bit of information, that space is utilized quite extensively by the Phoenix Theater. It's their offices, their general manager's office. They have a production office, and it's definitely being used. And I know that when they moved in there, they did some upgrades themselves, so they put investment into there as well. So just some information for you.
And sorry if I didn't mean to say it's wasted space. What I'm saying is it's public facing space. Probably some of the best public facing space of the whole building. And it's not, I believe the theater office doesn't use it for public interfacing. So that may be rejigged. Like I say, we've got the back 40 and potentially upgrades to the theater and everything else. So that should be considered, because again, it seems if you have, for example, if you want to move a tenant into the back 40, but they would much rather have public facing because the tenant wants to have street access or whatever it is, it's a consideration whether everything should be shuffled around. Now that makes my life way more difficult. So I'd be happy if we just said, no, just leave it the way it is, because that's great. But I think it's worthy of consideration is all I'm saying. How it's used and why it's where it is.
Okay, that's pretty good information there, Mr. McQuaig. I think we can have staff talk to the tenants here about their future and current needs for that space, and maybe that's an initial way we can go forward here, and then involve you in some feedback that they may have given. Is there any more comments on this? Very well, I'll get you to move along, Mr. McQuaig.
Okay, well, project planning, we are going to be involving all the stakeholders. So as the council will have to identify what stakeholders and how we deal with all the different people and all that sort of stuff. So we've had some reasonable feedback, and I think your last statement sort of hits the nail on the head. The staff can talk to the theater and BC services and then involve us as needed. So I think I've got a handle on this now. from where you're going from. But we should be giving some consideration for the whole next steps where the general public will be involved in this in some fashion. And we've kind of skirted exactly how. But at some point, the general public will be involved. And I realize the general public can access these sort of meetings, but what level of involvement in general town hall meetings or surveys or whatever will involve the general public is a question that council should consider. It's not time yet because I don't want to open it up to anything the public wants. At this point, we have to do some basic design work and figure out some parameters that are feasible and everything else first. But some consideration of that has to be thought of.
Okay, for the stage we're at now, Mr. McQuaig, I think you're right. The design stage, fixing things that are code and so on and so forth. I don't see a particular need to engage the public in this sort of necessary work that has to be done now. But as we move along, I think very much we should be talking to the public on some of these issues as they get closer to the implementation stage. Did you want to move along? Oh, sorry, Councillor Goering.
So I think that there needs to be a robust public consultation process, and I'm very confident that our staff can design something because they have many times. They know what works in our community and what doesn't work in our community. They know timing. They've got that all down pat. That said, I think that, the whole Grace Manor portion of this, I think needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I wouldn't want to wait. Like there's people's lives, there's a separate society, then there's BC Housing. This is a public meeting. Everybody knows that changes are coming. So if we can get out in front of any concerns that might be, taking place in the community, I think that would be a great benefit to all of us. So yeah, and I want to see the public consulted in a great way.
Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, I agree. We need to do a lot of consulting, and our staff can pretty much handle that. They've done quite a good job in the past with it. I think to date, we should maybe have some sort of public announcement information on the considerations we are currently looking at and some of the decisions we have made. Like, I know we haven't made anything final, but we did decide we are going to bring this building up to code. So let's have a public announcement on it. Here's some potential scopes. Here's what council's looking at. Give them kind of a bird's eye view of things. And then as we start to scale it down to where the project's going to be, we can provide that as it comes out. We have meetings scheduled. They can be at the beginning of each meeting, like, oh, here's a 10-minute, here's an update over the past 2 weeks on where we're going with this project. And we can just, instead of having Facebook blasts and this and that, just make it about our meeting, integrate it into our meetings until the project's done. And it's simple, I think.
Councillor Penny. Any thoughts?
Not really. I do believe that we should involve the public. How much, I'm not really sure, at what stages or whatever, but yeah, I'm okay with both the ideas there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McQuaig.
Okay, so that's all I really had to. These are the answers I was looking for today, and just to be clear, we are working closely with staff. It's important to here. I'll stop sharing. It's just a silly sign now. We have been working closely with staff, and we have ongoing meetings and everything else. And as we're marching forward, at the end of the day, the council is the one calling the shots, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind. So we're sort of, this was a general check-in. Here's some questions we need answered. We will be doing this again, I guarantee you, as we come up with more specific questions. But right now, we now have enough to start more detailed stuff. And although exactly how the public is involved has not been determined, but I think you guys can figure that part out and work with staff and everything else there, but they're definitely involved all the way along, and that's fine too. So I think I'm good. I think I have all the questions I needed. I'm certainly open to answer any specific questions that anyone has as well, to the best of my ability.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. McQuaig? Councilor Roper.
Not a question, just a comment that I'm really encouraged with all the consultation and how the project is going so far. I think things are in great hands. And I'd just like to thank you, Jack, for joining us today and getting this clarification. It's really good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. McQuaig before we let him go? Very well. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. McQuaig.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll be in touch. Okay, bye-bye.
Very well. Is there anything else? Any other business? Very well. I'll get a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Gerwing, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor. And we are adjourned. Thank you.